Why boring businesses are really good candidates for automation is because they are going to be fairly tight on the budgets and they just solve it through human resources. If you think about an automation as this virtual employee that can do infinite amount of tasks without being paid over time, and then whatever you spend on is less than you would be spending on a full-time employee, that becomes a no-brainer for why you would want to do these things. So for someone who starts looking into automation as a way to just generate extra income by automating other people's businesses, these are the kind of things that could produce good results rather quickly, because you implement it once for a client and can start replicating for other clients. My recommendation would be to start with low-hanging, simpler automations and just adopt this model for approaching businesses and then selling them the idea to automate parts. These are the perfect opportunities.
In terms of like boring businesses, I think the big opportunity outside of just, acquiring a boring business would be helping the boring businesses improve and grow as a contractor, as a consultant.
Absolutely.
So that's where I know your area of expertise is. And I'm curious, what are the most high leverage, flows or workflows you would see people benefiting most to learn that they could maybe pitch to a business? Because you can't just walk in there and say, I'll automate your whole business. That seems very wishy-washy and no one's going to take you seriously. So what are like the concrete, most needed and highest leverage workflows that someone should learn and then pitch to a type of boring business?
Let's take a business and start dissecting what type of employees and what type of work that is being done routinely at that business. So let's go with self-storage, which is probably one of the most efficient type of businesses. Most of the self-storage businesses that I've used their service, you go there, and if you're lucky, there is a live person who will be there. Otherwise, you just call and hope that they will return your call. So it is already very efficient. Can it be automated further? Of course, I believe so. Because if you think, what kind of work are they doing? Well, one, preparing the paperwork to sign. That's an opportunity to optimize, where you have an automation system that gets all the paperwork ready, emails it to the client, waits for it to be signed, and takes whatever unit that was sold out of the inventory. That can be automated. Then good old marketing, that's always an area that is just prime for automation. Generating content, publishing it out, listening in on the conversations online and looking for the opportunities where someone says, oh, we're relocating and, we need to move. So the automation there is kind of understanding the dynamics that could be seasonal and listening in on those conversations just to generate those leads. That is a part that would be quite useful to any business that wants to grow. Why boring businesses are really good candidates for automation is because they are going to be fairly tight on the budgets and they just solve it through human resources. So replacing those people, at least partially, with an automation system definitely yields very good results for the reason that you spend less to get the same things done, even more. So if you think about an automation as this virtual employee that can do infinite amount of tasks without being paid over time, and then whatever you spend on is less than you would be spending on a full-time employee, that becomes a no-brainer for why you would want to do these things. So for someone who starts looking into automation as a way to just generate extra income by automating other people's businesses, I think these are the kind of things that could produce very, very good results rather quickly, because you implement it once for a client and then can start replicating for other clients from the same industry or with the same needs.
So payments, invoicing, receipts,
right,
paperwork.
Exactly. Paperwork, exactly.
That's a big category. And then content and marketing related automation.
Yeah.
And then what about like customer scheduling, appointments, calendar related things?
Right, exactly. Handling renewals, reaching out and saying, hey, you're going to be up at the end of this month. And it could be done quite intelligently, because before you reach out to a customer saying that, renewal is coming up, you could look at your inventory. And if the inventory is abundant, then you don't want to lose this customer. You never want to lose a customer. But if you have a lot of available inventory, perhaps you would sweeten the offer just so they have more incentives to stay. So it's sort of like this supply and demand could play into the language that you use as to how you approach your prospects and existing customers.
What about like employee, like HR, onboarding?
Yeah, onboarding, the classic example that is being reviewed pretty much by most automation systems, like from the training perspective and documenting onboarding, user employee onboarding is going to be one of the prime examples that everyone's pitching.
Because it sucks.
Yeah, exactly. Like how do you get someone up to speed very quickly in the shortest amount of time? Having a checklist that is driven by your automation, I think is good, especially with AI, because with AI, creating some kind of test system that checks whether someone really understood and got it and can answer, some questions and kind of gauge their mastery in whatever you specialize in, that becomes relatively simple.
I'm sure you've had lots of clients, right? So do you have any examples where you've been able to really transform a business's revenue, but maybe just overall efficiency?
Absolutely, yeah. There are a number of reasons, and there is not a specific industry that would really stand out. Most of the optimizations that we have seen and implemented were really in the process of replacing the job that humans were doing manually with an automated system. And for the majority of them, I guess the commonality is that it really amounted to processing by humans some kind of document where they basically would have to open it up, whether it's invoice or an agreement or whatever, right? Extracting information just by reading it and retyping somewhere else. And that's a very time-consuming process, regardless of the industry. So those are the most successful stories that we have either witnessed or implemented ourselves. Right now, we're working with a couple of clients on implementing the process of a virtual salesperson. The same story that a lot of people are pitching, like, I created an agent that generates X number of $1,000 per month. It's more complex than it sounds. I have seen the flows or the automations that people share in their videos, whether it's on YouTube or TikTok. In reality, they're way more complex. And a good automation, let's talk about that automation, right? So you want to have an AI agent or just an agent, automation agent, that can find leads, do the prospecting, determine whether it's qualified or not, or make the best decision whether it's qualified. Initiate the contact, or at least reach out with a more or less personalized message, and then sit and wait for the response. If there is a response, great, establish the dialogue. If there is no response, perhaps do a follow-up. And then be persistent enough where the likelihood that you establish the contact that can lead to a more intelligent conversation goes up. And at that point, hand off to a human. So with that, it's fairly simple loop, but that loop is very dynamic in its nature, just because you will come across different people from different, perhaps somewhat different roles, different industries, and you make the best judgment whether they have a problem that you're solving. You want the initial message to be unique enough where the likelihood that they will respond goes up. So training your AI system to generate that kind of opening.
Is there any screening? Because I'm imagining if you have some sort of AI that scrapes information on a prospect and maybe customizes the email, if it's like cold outreach, let's say, what if it scrapes something that's not that relevant, or creates an email because sometimes it'll focus on one really specific detail that's actually not that important or relevant. And then it just sounds weird. Like you're congratulating them on an achievement from 4 years ago. That's it seems unlikely that you would reach out on the basis of.
It's definitely possible. That's another element that makes this kind of automation more complex. So, and for that reason, anytime I hear that someone created this kind of virtual agent, makes me question, of how bulletproof, how solid it is, whether it really accounts for these type of things. Many of the examples that are being touted, if you look closely at what they're doing, there's not even a step to just kind of search for any other relevant information. You find a lead. Yes, it is in the role that you want, senior marketing director, whatever. It's in the company of the size that you want. So it hits you hit those check marks on the criteria that you identified. But do you make an extra effort to go and read the blog of that company just to link the dots? for any kind of announcements that they have made? Have you searched and looked through the LinkedIn page of that person just to see what they have shared recently, what they have said? Have you checked on X to see what kind of activity they have manifested on sharing, commenting, posting of the original content that they came up with? Those are the data points you really have to put together to connect in order to create that mental image of the product that you're about to contact. So, and the more those data points that you aggregate, the more intelligent your initial opener would be.
Is there a point of customizing it? Like, okay, of course there's a point of customizing, but I feel like more of the attention should almost be placed on the actual value proposition or point of your email than making it seem like you did all this research just to talk to them about an achievement they made. Like, I almost feel like the customization part to me seems more valuable in the follow-up when if they respond and you're answering questions they have or whatever. Like in that case, it makes sense to me to do research on what they're looking for in the initial outreach, because you don't want it to be with random information that's just cluttering the email, right? Like you still want it to be
Relevant.
concise enough and relevant. So I would almost rather have a more simplified, but I know it's safe email than like one that's more customized, but at risk of being like weird and I don't know, overly wordy.
You're right. Yeah, you don't want to go into way too many details, which for the majority may end up being irrelevant. Anytime I receive an email where they congratulate me on some achievement, I can really read between the lines that that was an automated where they grabbed the first two sentences from my LinkedIn bio and congratulate me on starting a company or so it's easy to spot those. And rather than doing this, if your intelligence system can connect the dots for a prospect, for a lead, to come up with a reason why it believes that the solution that you have would solve the problem, the more accurately you can connect those dots, the more likely they will be responding because you really hit the hammer on that nail. You start looking as a detective for the pain points that specific lead has talked about, implied, whatever, right? You pain points because the initial outreach, I really believe, should focus on addressing the pain point.
100%. Yeah.
And it could come up with it in a way where, someone talked about raising money and may have, perhaps, where they're coming from to raise money, where they have limited staff. So now they will have a hiring problem, or, they had some staff in a particular organization, but lacking in some other organization. So I think they're either looking for people or looking for ways to automate that part of the business now that they have more money and they're expected to scale. I think in a way you sort of figured out that there is going to be a problem. They will need to get to their results faster, not that they have investors asking for those results or expecting.
Could you just give it like your AI, whatever agent, an outline of what your business solves, like what your product, your service is, and then say, okay, given what you know about my business, do research on this specific person or company and look at what their pain points are, and then create a message that links what you know about my business to what problems you know they have, instead of just look for something that is specific to their business to make a comment on.
That's do it. And it really has to be a multi-pronged approach where you really think about the system that does this kind of outreach, consisting of multiple scouts. Each scout that is responsible for, processing LinkedIn feeds or X feeds, or check if the person has a Medium account and regularly posts there, or blogs or announcements on the website where they announce that someone's going to be a speaker or if they're participating at such and such conference on. So the more data points you can collect and aggregate together to create that mental image, the better off you are. But your question, is it possible to train an AI to make the best possible judgment of how your product solves somebody else's problem? Yes, you can. Absolutely. Especially with reasoning models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the way I've approached like cold email in the past. And I think in general with marketing, you can't just have AI, for example, create a unique email for every single person because it's really hard to track and measure what types of messaging resonate. So like in a cold email campaign, you might do 10 variants and maybe only change one of the sentences. That's like your main topic with the pain point listed. And you leave the rest of the copy the same so that you're not testing against like apples with oranges. You're only testing the actual pain point, right? And then you can see, okay, this one's performing better because people are maybe resonating more with this specific pain point than this one. And then from there, you can maybe change other aspects. But it's really difficult to measure success of something if you do like the spray and pray approach. You really want to, only analyze the same variable against itself. So I think maybe the approach would be training a model to like fill in the blank or create some template, that makes sense. Like some sort of, okay, this is the intro copies may be the same, but then you have like an insert industry and then it can put the industry that it finds on your prospect and then insert their specific pain point in the next like those I don't know what it's called, the square brackets where you like get it to the variables, whatever. Yeah, like I think that approach to me makes more sense when writing emails with AI because you're not leaving it up to chance on how it decides to create the whole message. Because then it's like, how do you know what's working and what's not working?
You don't. You don't. You're right. And a more disciplined approach would be to have the model constantly executing A/B tests on itself. So you give it a little bit of room to experiment, but you put the weights on the elements of that email. Greeting would be 10%. Intro, like, why you're being contacted is probably like 70%. Of what you're doing is 20%. So then the greater the percentage, the fewer changes you expect to happen from email to email. But if the changes they are along of the same lines, so you create A and B versions, and then you train the same automation to basically perform the constant analysis on how many responses you get for A versus B over a period of time to determine which one's winning, and that becomes the prevalent one.
I'm thinking now it would be like the process that I use, I feel like could be automated so easily. But like part of the process is you do with like, let's say 2,500 leads, and then you examine, you say, okay, this campaign's performing better than this one. Or like maybe if it's lower than 2% positive response rate, turn that variant off, whatever, because there's better performing ones. And so if you could have an automation where it automatically imports the leads you scraped in batches, does the testing, and then automatically shuts on and off your campaigns depending on how they're performing, and then creates new variants based on that information and maybe tests, like you said, section A, section B, section C, whatever. That could be a very easy way, hands-free, to manage it. I guess the
engineering perspective, I would not treat that queue of leads as solid single queue. So you go through multiple sorting processes where you sort it out by industry, company size.
Well, assuming you've scraped by a specific, like let's say you've used Apollo,
so
they're all kind of in the same lump.
Similar
company size. Yeah, exactly. They're not just like very old.
Basically, you take 10%.
They're segmented essentially into one chunk.
You take 10%, you split it into two groups, and you do the testing on them because you don't want to ruin your chances.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's fairly traditional approach. For anyone who is looking into just automating their businesses, my recommendation would be to start with low-hanging fruit, simpler automations. For example, one of the simplest things, let's say if you're running a public support forum for your users, right? Whenever someone asks a question and it's posted, of course, there are systems now where as you're typing your question, it provides suggestions of other threads where that problem may be addressed. But I think the majority of people just ignore those just because they think that their problem is unique and you want to get personalized attention specifically to you. If you're running such a forum, in most cases, I would assume, then whenever something is posted, people get notified by email or Slack that there is a new thread. Creating an automation that internally, not publicly, internally gets that question, scans the thread if it's a continued conversation, checks against your documentation, checks against your knowledge base, and comes up with an answer that they're approved, rejected, modified, whatever, that could streamline the way your support works. And that would be fairly simple automation to implement. And things like this, the ones that are just will make the life of your existing organization easier and run smoother. Start with those. And then as you get better and better in getting those things implemented, I just start expanding to other more complex areas.
Is it I've seen like the way that a lot of automations or agents are structured, it's with smaller sub agents. So maybe there's one that's handling, I don't know, customer support, one that's handling the content stuff, one like they're all doing independent things and they're all controlled by a bigger agent that's sort of managing them. Is that a common structure for
Right. You don't want to put too many responsibilities to an agent because then you will get the effect of just generating noise rather than substance.
okay, so like building it as a little army.
Exactly. The narrower the scope, the greater odds of producing something valuable.
If you had let's say a medical practice, because that was the example you were using earlier, what are the first three things you would automate or first places you would look?
Patient onboarding, just because the amount of paperwork that needs to be signed and, with HIPAA and all of that is ridiculous. I don't understand. You come for your second, third, and whatever visit, you still have to fill out a form. Nothing's changed. Nothing. The things that they ask for, they cannot change. It's like, name, gender, social security. Yeah, you could have moved a different address, but who cares? They still have the insurance card, driver's license. So patient onboarding, getting all the paperwork signed, definitely a prime for automation. The way they are working with insurance companies, the amount of paperwork that is being filled out and filed and submitted to insurance, and then whatever conversations that are going on just to get the payment, that can be streamlined significantly. I don't know a whole lot about just the business of medical practices. I'm going to, as a patient, can observe to see what they're doing. Follow-up system would be great.
Yeah.
There are not that many doctors that I have experienced that would actually follow up, whose practice will follow up with you just to see if everything, like normally they would if there was a surgery. Not all of them, some. Like dental surgeries, they would check. Like good surgeons will check. Sometimes personally, which is like, wow. But in general, I think, no, that doesn't happen. Here's another thing that doesn't happen. I'm pretty sure it doesn't. They could give you a prescription and submit that prescription to a pharmacy, right? There is no feedback loop into the doctor's office to let them know that you actually picked up that prescription.
Yeah.
Which I think is a huge breakdown, because if you were in for a problem and if you needed the medication but you never picked it up, shouldn't it be like a huge warning sign that perhaps something went wrong?
Yeah.
Maybe you died.
So like I think information on prescription medication, like if you could have some sort of automation where as a patient you just text it, like I've been doing this for 5 days and this is how I reacted, and it just logs that information, because especially if you change doctors, like not many people go out of their way to really write down the name of the exact prescription that they had like a weird reaction to or something. And then like the doctor can misplace that information. But if you just have like some sort of way to automate that, like it could just be an automated follow-up of like, how are you finding this treatment? And then you just tell it like, whatever. Good, terrible, not great. And then the doctor also has that reference. I don't know. I just feel like there's ways of enhancing the transparency into your own experience with like the treatments you get.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Healthcare is definitely, it's a system that is so complex and monolithic and ancient that it's not that it just needs automation. It needs a complete overhaul. Speaking about the United States healthcare system, where you are, it's
It's not great. It's not great.
but it should be at least a little better, I think.
It's like, okay, it's free, but you wait a long time. I think because it's free. Actually, in private practice, it's obviously better, like for physio or whatever, because it's not like the hospital. But you know, it'd be nice, and I haven't had this happen, but if you could just get an automated follow up with everything because they'll write on a piece of paper like, oh, here's what you need to do sometimes, but like you'll lose that paper or whatever, you'll forget. They'll tell you like, I don't know. Sometimes they'll say they'll send you a link if they don't even send you a link. If you could just automatically get a list of the exercises prescribed to you with like links to how to do them,
Sure.
would help so much because I'll forget or I'll lose the paper or I won't know what something they wrote is because they scribbled it down. That in itself would have been really helpful, but no, that doesn't happen.
This is a great idea for an app, like a universal like aftercare app.
Don't even get for my own UX portfolio when I was working on this, I designed an app, and this was like 3 years ago. So if you track in the app like your weightlifting, your cardio, whatever, and it maybe just integrates with your Apple like health data or something, it can compare your exercise data to your health test data. And then also you can share that with your doctor directly. So then when they ask you about stuff, it's more accurate healthcare because they have all the transparency. But that's not a thing because here your documents are kind of locked in with your doctor, which sucks. People don't know what metrics to like really look at or why. So I don't know, like cholesterol or all like there's so many things. And if you could have an app tell you, here's what you can get tested for this reason, this is what it would tell you and why it's important. And if you have like you're at risk for certain things, now you know. And it's like having a personal health assistant with you at all times where you could just ask it questions, but it's personalized because it knows everything about you. Like think of, or even if you had a CGM, like a blood glucose monitor, it would know exactly how you react to like certain foods at certain times of the day. That was the idea I had like 3 years ago. And obviously it was just like a prototype, like whatever on Figma I made. But that would be so awesome. And I'm sure someone's making that now.
Right, because it's a matter of putting together your basic vitals. Most of them can be like pulse or general activity.
Yeah.
Burn. The phone can capture that quite nicely. Plus what you eat and any kind of symptoms that you exhibit, putting it all together. Some kind of, have you seen Dr. House? You watched that show? Yeah, so having your kind of a Dr. House app, the one, even with the same level of sarcasm, that would make it even better, I think. Just spits out what's wrong with you. Gosh, that would be amazing.
Yeah. And like you could ask it like, hey, what's supposed to be my max heart rate? And then you go for a run, you're like, oh, interesting. That's what my max heart rate was. And it'll know based on your Strava data what pace you were at. And then it could tell you like, hey, you have not been resting much because it knows your sleep data as well if you have some sort of whatever tracker and says that's probably why your pace has been off this week. Like it would just be able to connect all the dots. So if you're like an athlete or you're training or doing anything, it can tell you like, here's how to improve your speed, or maybe your VO2 max isn't that high. You should focus on improving that instead of your muscular endurance. If this is the goal, like you just tell your goals and it'll give you a whole roadmap for how to reach it based on all the information it has. And I think having that and then maybe gamifying it would be so much better for incentivizing like healthy lifestyle. Because if I can see this is how like much progress I made, or like this is the direct impact of this metric, it's a lot more motivating to make sure you're keeping on top of it.
Build more story into the numbers, or
exactly.
or create the story and guide you to make it happen.
Like Duolingo almost, but for health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. Like here's the thing, all the calorie counting apps, MyFitnessPal, or, I watched the video on Cali AI, which is like,
was that the one with the picture?
I think it's like an 18-year-old or 16-year-old.
Yeah, he took a picture of the food.
Take a picture. I'm curious how accurate that would be, right? Because if you take a pancake, how do you know if it's made with oatmeal or just regular flour?
Yeah. Or how do you know if it was olive oil or butter or whatever that was frying?
Exactly. There are so many variables that will have significant impact on the macros. But anyway, what would be cool if a calorie counting app would be gamified like Duolingo, where, because many of them will say, what's your goal? Like, do you want to gain weight, lose weight, whatever, maintain weight? And I'll say, you have to eat that many calories per day, right?
Yeah. I don't know. There's all sorts of stuff that would be fun to implement. I wish I was able to code.
And with all the apps that are coming out, where it builds a app for you from the whole concept of being able to code, I think, goes away.
The problem is, if I was to actually build something, like it's one thing to try and build something like vibe coding, but then if you don't actually know what you're doing, you can come into like problems that you wouldn't foresee, and then like you don't know how to fix them because you're probably wasting a ton of credits just using the like AI assistant to code it, right? For example, I literally tried to make a time tracking app recently just for fun, and oh my God, it kept like messing something up. And then I would tell it, no, the tooltip is not showing up now when I hover. And then when it would fix it, it would make the whole thing like overlap this other thing where it was supposed to be it was like the constraints was supposed to be in this container. And now my whole like time tracking thingy is hanging out and it's like overlapping. You're like, no, now this is, and then the hover doesn't work. So it went back and forth like 5 times. Like every time I would say, no, this still doesn't work, it would go back, fix, and it would cost me another 25 cents for that checkpoint. So then I spend like I don't know how many dollars. Okay, it wasn't a lot, but still, it's like, I don't know how to properly prompt it to fix the problems in a way that's not destructive. I can't just go in and look at it and be like, oh, that's the problem, because I don't have that knowledge. So I think that's where the skill of programming is still useful.
It's making the incremental changes where it's saying, look, this is good, modify this part. That's where I think most of the
that's what I did.
I think, well, it's not that what you did wrong. It's the AI systems. They're struggling to kind of accept whatever you identify and then modify a specific part by keeping everything the same. It's this the conversation window that it has perhaps is being reinterpreted every single time when a new question comes in, and leaves some things to interpretation. Therefore, in the next iteration, it comes out different. Yeah, but so you mentioned vibe coding is because I keep seeing that. Is it like this new thing where it's coding for those who used to be no coders? Are they like?
I think it's still okay. I could be using it wrong, but I think it could just be people who also are coders. So let's say you take DocuSign. If you make your own version of DocuSign using some like whatever no code platform, it'll speed up. Like I think the benefit of these no code platforms, I'm assuming even if you know how to code, it's still faster if you can get it working well because you're not manually doing it, right? So if you use a platform and like maybe you make something that already exists, but you just make it for this very specific feature you want, like that's kind of vibe coding because you're just making stuff to make your life easier kind of thing.
You don't code yourself, you rely on AI to generate code.
Yeah, and you're just going by the vibe. Like you're just like, okay, I need.
And if you're a programmer, you're in luck because you can just kind of see if it's doing the right thing. If you're not a programmer, good luck because
yeah, like I'm pretty sure Replit has, or I don't know which one was using. It might have been Replit has like the assistant one, and then it has a different one where you can like actually just look at the code and do it more manually. But the manual part is a lot cheaper, but the like actual AI assistant language model is more expensive to use. So I wouldn't know how to use the cheaper version to fix anything or like, I guess even determine what's wrong with it. That's my problem.
Here's a question for you. And with your UX background, I'm especially interested in your opinion on this. Do you think as the quality of the decisions that AI produces or the way it can handle human speech, do you think that the interface to interact with apps as time goes on will be shifting from traditional interfaces to more of a conversational style?
100%. Like imagine you don't have to go manually to pull up a report. You could just say, hey, I want to report on this. And then you'd still see the interface, but it's almost like you have the chat interface integrated into it and it'll just move to that part of the interface for you. So if you say like, hey, maybe if you're on Instagram, you're like, can you find that picture that Melanie posted with Jake from 3 years ago, and it'll just like navigate to that part of the page. Like you could still, I assume, like interact with it as you normally would, but it's almost like that's how I would want to see it. And I don't know how I see things current. Like that's the next step, I think, would just be having like an AI that can use your platform for you, but you just tell it what to do and then it takes you to that part of it.
So in the next generation of dentist office software, would the receptionist say, "Hey, check in, Christina, she's ready," and it's like boom,
Like
and it's
maybe if it could do
room
that,
room one, and you go there.
basically you're like the boss just telling your system what to do.
Sure, right, yeah,
That's all everything's gonna be.
it's your assistant. So there needs to be your personal assistant, your business assistant, your team assistant. There's just all those assistants doing their own little things.
Yeah.
I think with all of this, we may be on the track where the form factor of the smartphone as they exist today may be changing back to this Nokia, whatever, 91. So if the whole thing can be done conversationally, just for all your apps, and I don't know, maybe like, of course, watching the movie or seeing pictures, that's different. Perhaps with a chip implanted in your head, you could just like it's just rendered on your retina. I think
Yeah.
then we can definitely go back to Nokia flip phones.
Yeah. I think that you'd still want like pictures or videos or whatever to have. So you having some sort of visual interface is useful for, I think, entertainment purposes or creative slash brainstorming purposes. Like if you need to think through something, it's useful to draw it out or put pen on paper even or something. Have some sort of ability to put things down. Also, I think with decision making, it's useful. Like if you have a dashboard in front of you that tells you like the most important metrics of something, it's probably easier to make a decision based on those metrics when you can see them in front of you relative in size to each other than just like arbitrarily asking, can you tell me what these metrics are? Because holding that information in your brain's, I think, harder to do while making the decision.
Right. Again, you having this kind of medium and artifact as the basis for decision making puts the responsibility on the human, on the user, to one, ask the right questions,
Yeah.
just results, and second, interpret what you see. I believe machines with AI are
I
going
see.
in terms of both asking questions and interpreting the results, and really providing a list of suggestions, action items to whoever's in charge. Or like, we want to expand to Asia.
Yeah.
And then it comes up with a plan of that is based on the information that you already have, not just hypothetical. Same thing for the example that you provided. Like how do you get to the point where your max heart rate is within certain range as you increase your distances and complexity of your runs? Then you don't need to look at all the blood work and everything. You should just know what to do to get there.
Yeah. The shortest path from A to B. But I do think like even in the earlier case of go to market or expand to Asia or whatever, you'd still be the one making the choice. AI still has to present the options and you're still making that decision, granted much more easily. It's not automatically going to just deploy its plan for expanding into Asia. And in that case, having AI explain the options to you, again, like it gives you the options, but having some visualization might help you make that decision between the options it gives you still useful. Because if you get a big block of text and it explains things, but maybe it's talking about statistics or numbers that have to do with scales that we're not as great at visualizing as humans, we have a harder time with really imagining how big of a difference there is between like, I don't know, 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000. Like it's pretty difficult to actually visualize. But I think it'll be interesting to engineer a sort of response that is even more clear or easy to digest as a person than just text. Like I wonder if that's going to become a thing.
I think it will. Because that's one of the problems that we have is the majority of people are not good communicators in whatever medium, neither text nor pictures. A lot of people struggle to kind of just vocalize or visualize their thoughts.
Yeah. Do you know the book Clear Thinking? So Shane Parrish has this book called Clear Thinking, and it's about how to think clearly. I only started it recently, but I've heard about it quite a bit. It gives you a more concrete framework, I guess, for thinking through your ideas and being able to communicate them in a understandable way. But I think this is the type of thing where being able to actually succinctly and very accurately articulate your thoughts will be a really big leverage point, especially with AI, where it only executes as well as you give it input.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, there is some loss of identity and originality, but I think that is still okay, except for the dating apps, because those are going to be completely hijacked by AI.
So, okay, to wrap up then, what's at stake for the businesses that are not automating and not looking to improve?
Well, it's going to be business as usual. You'll be running that business the same way that it's been done for ages, right? You hire people, you outsource, you spend money to get things done. And that is fine because, you could be just doing so well where you don't need to automate. However, in the competitive environment we're in, right, you need to be looking for ways to get things done in a more optimized fashion. But boring business as an opportunity, and it's not necessarily an opportunity for business owners, just because in boring businesses, you're so focused on getting things done where you don't really look for optimizations necessarily. I think it's going to be a better opportunity for consultants that have studied automation systems, that have figured out how to get it done. They know how various automation frameworks work and what their pros and cons are, advantages and disadvantages, and just adopt this model for approaching businesses. Boring businesses are very good candidates, and then selling them the idea to automate parts.
Then, yeah, it's definitely the next big, next big model. Yeah.
I think, especially when the economies take downturn, and it seems like, it's hard to gauge where we are right now. A lot of people are very cautious and concerned about where things are going, which I think will have an impact on just economic condition in general. These are the perfect opportunities, perfect timing for those opportunities.
Yes, 100%. When everyone's slow, improve your processes so you're ready to go when things pick up.
Exactly. Right. And then once things start getting better, if you are on the foundation where things are just flying and automated and you don't have to worry about them, all the power to you. It's going to be more wind to your sail.
Exactly. Thank you for teaching us yet again about automations and the future of AI, where we're heading. Learned more today, as usual.